As was indicated, I'm talking about branding Tobago for the agricultural sector, talking about the perspectives and strategies for developing the comprehensive agricultural sector with respect to clean, green, safe, and serene. Very quickly, three main things I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I'll talk about some of the perspectives, and then the strategies, and then conclude. First of all, in terms of agriculture, up until Hurricane Flora, when some of you probably were not born, agriculture was very important to Tobago. In fact, Tobago was considered the breadbasket of the Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago. Now that has changed considerably. Most of the food that Tobago eats is imported from Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, it's imported from abroad because most of the food that Trinidad and Tobago eats is imported as well. But some things haven't changed. The farming population is more than 45 years old, most of them about 50 years old average. There are many small holders, about 92% of the farms have an average size of 2 hectares or less, and almost all the holdings are less than half a hectare. They're mainly part-time farmers, and farming is mainly crop-based. They do vegetables, root crops, food crops, and small-scale livestock such as sheep, goats, pigs, poultry, and rabbits. Now, in terms of the regional perspectives, the Caribbean faces a number of challenges in its agriculture and food and nutrition security sectors. One, there's an absence of pillars. Bananas and sugar, which were king in the old days, are no longer king. Because of trade liberalization, these industries, these crops have no longer major significance in the country. We have a very high food import bill. We import about $4 billion every year in food, and we have low agricultural growth. Most of our Caribbean countries are not interested in agriculture. Trinidad and Tobago, case in point, it's mainly the energy sector. You talked about Barbados, it's tourism, Antigua, tourism. They're talking about services. There's risk management. A number of our countries suffer from floods, hurricanes, droughts every year. And there's weak public policy. And of course, our human development is poor. A lot of our young people don't even want to go into agriculture. It's hard work, it's high risk. They're not interested in it. In terms of the need for agricultural revitalization, this table, I'm just going to ask you to look at the GDP growth in agriculture for Trinidad and Tobago, which is the last row. For agriculture, growth is 0.6% of GDP. Agricultural value-added growth is negative 19.1. Unemployment, especially youth unemployment, is 13.6, and in a number of our Caribbean countries, it's over 30%. The global average is about 15%, so we have high youth unemployment. If we look at our food import bill, look at the bottom for Trinidad and Tobago. From 1995 to 2000 to 2011, the food import bill has been increasing meteorically. It's going in leaps and bounds, and for all the Caribbean islands, it's the same, maybe with the exception of Belize, Guyana, Suriname. What is even more troubling is that a lot of the food that we import is the processed carbohydrates, the oils, the sugars. So we have a severe problem of obesity among our population. And if you look at this figure, the women of Trinidad and Tobago are some of the fattest in the region. And we have a severe problem of obesity of our young people. We're finding 18-year-olds coming down with type 2 diabetes. And that has severe implications, for our health. It means that we are spending quite a lot of our GDP to solve or to deal with health problems, which we could avoid if we eat properly. In terms of your national perspectives for Trinidad and Tobago, just last week, Friday, the UNDP had a conference which was looking at the Sustainable Development Goals for the Caribbean, and specifically for Trinidad and Tobago. What are the priorities for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of our Sustainable Development Goals? And the priorities which came up were the economic environment, the environment, economic development, crime and violence, health, poverty, and the human capital. And for agriculture in particular, we have food and nutrition security, agriculture and rural productivity and business development, and modernization of the food and agriculture sector as the main priorities identified for Trinidad and Tobago. Now, if we look specifically, some of the emerging issues, we have very weak data collection systems. Our markets, our market information systems are poor. Predial larceny, or in local parlance, thieving, is a serious disincentive for agricultural production in the region. When we had a discussion with, we had a stakeholder consultation with the Ministry of Agriculture and some key stakeholders in the agriculture sector, they said that they were very interested in small ruminants because there's a high importation of sheep and goat meat from New Zealand. Why should we pay such high amounts of money when you can grow sheep and goat here? NCDs, diabetes, some forms of cancer, high blood pressure, all because of our diet, is a serious problem. Youth and unemployment, and disaster risk management. Some of the local perspectives. Here in Tobago, there's a high incidence of pests and diseases, and new and emerging pests and diseases as well. They're escalating input costs, especially for livestock feeds. Predial larceny again, land availability and land tenure, because in Tobago there's the Dutch system, I believe, for land law. And this is very different from Trinidad and Tobago. There's limited use of improved technologies, limited agro-processing. Commodities which are used locally are usually sourced from Trinidad. Fisheries and aquaculture is a main concern here. Weak infrastructure, markets and marketing. There's limited market information. All of these are issues which need to be dealt with and perspectives that we need to deal with in terms of agriculture if you're branding Tobago. So in terms of the strategies now, what can we do for a clean, green, safe, and serene Tobago? Well, the agricultural development goals speak of creating a more enabling environment, a dynamic eco-food industry that creates branded products, attracts investment, and generates lucrative business opportunities, a proactive, innovative, and output-driven leadership, and an efficient use and conservation of Tobago's natural land, forest, and marine resources as a base for supporting sustainable livelihoods. So let's look at the goal of enabling environment. What are the strategies which can be used to address this problem? Well, one of the key issues here is governance. And I say governance, not government. And governance has to deal with things like public policy, legislation, certification and standards, incentives, inclusion, data and information, public awareness and education, and partnerships. And when I talk about public policies, we're talking about policies for land use, policies for water, public purchasing. And that is, for example, if you have an activity like this and the government is sponsoring, I don't want to see apples, grapes, pears, and plums on my table. I want to see pomsite, mango, I want to see local fruit juices. You must serve your local foods, brand Tobago food in your hospitals, in your jails, in your school feeding programs. All your local, anything that the government has involved in that involves food should be Tobago's food. Legislation, again, if you're talking about food safety, you want the tourists to come here, you don't want them to get sick from eating anything, and you must legislate against it and you must certify and have standards for it. And you must enforce those standards, and you must check for it, because it's all well and good to say that you do not have pesticide residues in the fruits and vegetables that you grow, but how can you be so sure? So you must have labs which are well equipped to test for it and enforce and make sure that the people, you trace it back to whoever produces it, so that that person's produce is no longer sold in your local markets. Incentives for using local foods. Inclusion of the poor and the vulnerable. Especially you have some pockets of poverty in Tobago, and how do you know those people are not eating properly? And they could eat Tobago's food by your backyard gardening programs. Inclusion of the youth. As I said, young people are not interested in agriculture. So how do we get them interested? You make it savvy, you make it techy, you put them onto the apps on the apps on their laptop, their phones, to show where they can get the technologies. You do them protected agriculture. You make it very sexy, but you also have to provide systems of support for these young people, because they don't know how to do it. So the mentorship programs, the programs where you can link them to, for example, the land. There's a land bank program, for example, that we are doing in Grenada, St. Vincent, and St. Lucia, where the government owns the land, and young people who want to go into agricultural production have access to this land, and the government provides them with a lease, which protects the government so that there's no squatting and so on going on, and makes sure that the land is used for agriculture, not for housing and other uses. The government provides them with support services for marketing, for credit, for extension, and there's a system of monitoring the leases to ensure that they pay the leases. And so if they don't pay, they're kicked out. So there's a land bank. Data and information, very important part of governance, because you have to be able to make decisions which are based on sound empirical data rather than what is politically expedient. We know our politicians only work on a 5-year basis. Public awareness and education, well, that needs not to be said. This whole issue of buying Tobago's food, you have to get the people involved and buy into this, and the only way you can do this is to educate them about the value of Tobago's food, the value of eating locally. And from the health perspective, it's a very good way to say, if you buy local, you eat local, you know what you're eating. You're not eating an apple which was picked X months ago and waxed, okay? And the other thing is partnerships. We can't do it alone. Governance has to do it, finding the strategic partners with whom we can work. And even within the Tobago House of Assembly, it's not only agriculture. You have to deal with your people who are dealing with health, education. Everybody needs to speak together because it's not your ministry or your secretary or your division, it's your country. Okay. Quickly, eco-foods, the food industry, branding and business. Engagement of the private sector. It's all well and good for us to say you must grow local and buy local and eat local. But the reality is our private sector buys cheap externally and brings it in because it's for them the bottom line is the dollar. So how do we engage the private sector, the hotels, the restaurants, the groceries to say you have to commit to buying Tobago's food? In Barbados, what they've done an incentive scheme, sandals. In addition to having a tax shelter, you say a certain percentage of your food that you serve in sandals must come from local farmers. So you sign a memorandum of understanding which goes with the package of coming into your country. Niche markets. There's something that's specific to Tobago that you can say, this is a Tobago, like bene balls and anything with sesame seed and so on. Anybody who's out there in the diaspora who sees that will say, it's from Tobago, I will buy it. So finding those niche markets and working it. But a key part of it has to be the food safety. As I say, you have to make sure that the standards are there. There's no pesticides in terms of the nutritional standards, so that when people eat it, they say, I'm eating good, healthy Tobago food because I want to look like a Tobagonian. And you must diversify the product. Food art. I mean, I have gone to Italy where there's a store. Sorry, they sell, well, even in Trinidad, they have baskets of fruit carved in flower, like flowers. You use your horticulture. I mean, when you go to Italy and you buy a bouquet, it's not just a set of flowers that they put like that. They package it, even a pot with crepe paper and bows. Simple things like that, that sells, and it's Tobagonian because it's very different from what anybody else is doing. And there's innovation that you can use, especially with the young people, the use of ICT, but also innovation. There's a place in New York and a place in Turin and in Rome called Italy. It is a store which sells everything that is related to food, from pots and pans to wines to chocolates. Why can't we have a Tobago Italy? You know, and you link it with your food festivals. There's the Jazz Festival, there's the World Food Day. Link your serving of your Tobago foods with these particular festivals. Recently you had the Dasheen Festival. Link it with your local production, and that's how you get local production going in Tobago. And of course, to go along with that is the business development support, especially for our young people. Sorry, just wanted to make sure, the thing about branding, the uniqueness of Tobago, its land, its environment, its culture. You know, you talk about Tobago, well, in Tobago love, let the food be about Tobago love. You know, just pull it together. Selling points of the island life, the flavors, the wholeness, the health, the well-being, clean, green, serene. Link that to the food that you eat and make sure it's a high-value product, which is low in all those things that are bad for you. Leadership was another goal that came out in the your strategic plan, your the CEDP, governance, human resource development, transparency and accountability, mentorship, especially for our young people. Our young people, you need to hold their hands until they can stand on their own to make them leaders. And leadership is not about only people in the Tobago House of Assembly. It starts at the community level. It starts with finding the people with the passion who pulls it along. And these are the leaders who will take your food industry to where it needs to be. So leadership has to be at all levels of the community, at community as well. Sustainable natural resources, we're talking about land use, we're talking about land tenure, we talked about land banks, land suitability. If somebody wants to go into agricultural production, make sure that you put them in the lands which are best suited so you get the best of yields. Land zoning, ensuring that the housing doesn't take over your housing, your agricultural areas. Water management must be integrated. It's not only about the rainwater and the water in your groundwater, but it must be rainwater harvesting, because in times of climate change, where you have scarcity of water, it must be about water reuse and recycling, and the quality of the water is important. And having information systems to test and to make sure that you meet those standards is very important. Waste management for composting to go into your agricultural sector. And for fisheries, a code of conduct of responsible fishing. And then for the forest, you have the forestry and the protected areas management, and even agroforestry as one of your strategies for your agricultural sector. So in conclusion, you need a revitalized agricultural sector. You have to take into consideration the regional, national, and local perspectives, especially with respect to the high food import bill and your health. Make that link to health. It's very important, because the leading cause of death in the Caribbean right now is the chronic non-communicable diseases. And we can reverse that by the food we eat if we eat healthy local food. You send that message out there and start with the young people from very early. Let them understand the education in the schools, etc., of the importance of eating healthy, eating local, eating Tobagonian to look like a Tobagonian. And then the strategies relevant to achieving those goals consider the natural resources, the people, and the governance. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go with, and right, so those two, we have two.
Afternoon once again. I just wanted to kind of draw to our attention that all these things are coming together along a single thread. And we're talking about mass tourism this morning versus niche tourism. And now, when we start talking about our communities and our food as part of that branding, one of the things that I was happy to hear you say is to talk about this eco-food industry, because the models now are going back to permaculture and organic and sustainable agriculture, because it allows us that traceability, to know where our food is coming from and to know what's in our food, and to reduce the transport costs and environmental costs associated with moving food around, and the concentration of waste that's created by food production from farming animals and those kinds of issues. And I'd really love to see us have an organic, community-supported agriculture program in Tobago, because there's so many opportunities here for us, because Tobago is so small, to do a model waste management system, to do a model eco-food industry, to brand all of those things as part of our tourism product and move the Tobago economy forward in a way that we can sustain over time.
Yeah, totally agree. The certification for the organics is an important part of it too, and it becomes very expensive. The thing about the organic foods is that there's a cost associated with that, and so in terms of competitiveness, but again, as I say, if you look at it from the long-term cost of the health care that you will have to avoid by eating healthily, that it's well worth it. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'll sort of follow up a discussion as well. I have it in my notes here. Well, before I get to that, is the land bank in Grenada, was that came out of the building back better after the hurricane, or that was before?
No, that was we just about to start that project. It came out of the government's plans for divesting of some of, not necessarily divesting, but using idle and underutilized lands, because coming out of the demise of the banana industry, a lot of people left the banana lands, and some of those lands were owned by the government. So the government says, here we have this good idle land, and you have young people who want to do agriculture, but they don't have access to land. Let's develop a land bank which will allow the two to meet.
The other one is talking a little bit on what the previous speaker spoke about, was we have to look seriously. We want to encourage agriculture, and we know about the type 2 diabetes, and we're concerned about the fruits, local fruits and so on, and some of the doctors telling you, do eat mangoes if you have diabetic and so on, you know, and some of them will tell you eat it in moderation and so on. We have to not just say, well, the doctor says so. There obviously will be some mangoes, varieties that will be sweeter than others. So I'm concerned, it brings me to the point about the nutritional value of what the local fruits we have. I was in the University of University of Boston some years ago, and they were doing major research on this fruit we have down here that deals with cancer. And they say
pomegranate.
Pomegranate, yeah. And they say it has so many anti-cancerous properties.
Soursop too.
And soursop as well. You know, we must finalize and realize whether that is true or dovetail on that kind of research that is being done by the University of Boston and Massachusetts as well, to see whether anything there, whether the same pomegranate that they're using or testing is the same variety that we have down here, and see whether it really have these properties, and maybe see how we could develop another industry coming out of that sort of thing. So the nutritional value or the healing components of our local fruits, we have to look at that seriously.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, that's why I had research and development as one of the key components as well. And in addition to just finding out what is there, it's also ammunition, because I don't know if you remember, a few years ago they used to tell us that coconut oil. But because we didn't know, we didn't do the research ourselves, we took it and we stopped buying it. But if you do the research and you have the information, you arm yourself, you fight fire with fire. Okay? Okay, thank you very much.